All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the July 25th, 2022 Grants Pass City Council Workshop, where we are talking today about public safety funding options. Take it away, JC.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Feel like the old Verizon guy. All right.
Oh, and everybody, I guess I'll let you know, we have Vanessa and DJ on the phone. So everybody is present.
So along with the slides in your packet of things I gave you today, I have the county's items that they presented on Wednesday, as well as going through the exhibits again, because some of this looks small on a slideshow presentation that I'll give you the full paper version. So subject and summary, further utility fee information, the county proposed sales tax endorsement, and then the relationship to council goals as enhanced community safety and the #1 goal for permanent funding for public safety services. So kind of skipping over what we went through last time, which were some of the background questions, going straight into the further utility fee information. This is all going to be a rehash from 2 weeks ago, but it was a lot of information, so I figured we'd go through it again. So the pros is it's passed on to those who already use city services and logical assumption that they use public safety, and we can include those property tax exempt properties. Similar staffing and resources already in place for the city, and there's a case of a jurisdiction lowering their fee. The cons, obviously, it's another fee on the utility bill and potentially increased delinquencies. So of the data that we do have for the City of Grants Pass, there's 4 kind of readily options out there of how we charge things and in comparison to other jurisdictions. So we have an additional unit charge, or AUC, like the City of Medford and their public safety fee. Impervious area, which we have a stormwater fee based on that. Transportation, which is the old jail utility fee. And then water meter size is how the City of Corvallis charges their public safety utility fee. So your AUC, there's about 2,700 accounts out there that don't have water meters, so we would need to figure out what we would do with those instances. The current AUC data only applies to residential water accounts, as kind of support of that. And you can see the Medford Municipal Code, that it's for each residential dwelling unit, business unit, or tenant space. So it's based on the number of units. So to kind of rehash what we talked about last time, if there were 10 apartments in an apartment complex, they would get a factor of 10. A duplex would be a factor of 2. And for Exhibit 5, you can see this is how the numbers come out: commercial, multifamily, public, and residential. And to the very right, that percentage potentially of who would be paying for those services with that approximate $1 million. Does anybody have any questions regarding the AUC? Yeah.
Public refers to city, school, what?
City, school, and county, I believe.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
JC?
Yes.
Also on the utility, directly on water, do you have a ballpark figure of how many nonprofits are out there that don't pay property tax would actually be contributing in the water system?
You know, I didn't pull up that information.
So
as far
your
as
gut
how many
feeling would
accounts that
be 100 or 1,000 or?
I don't know the exact number. I don't want to guess for you, but knowing that they're kind of in this commercial, I believe, in the numbers, so I don't think it'd be as high as 1,000.
Okay, thank you.
Question? Yeah. So the 2,700 accounts that don't have water meters, like, who would that be?
So there's residential people in the City of Grants Pass that actually have wells. And so there's several accounts out there that people don't actually draw water from our water system, they draw it from their own wells.
So when you say several, 2,700 of those?
There's about 2,700 is the estimation that I got.
So do they pay sewer?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm just going to back up on that. So sewer is based upon their water usage, isn't it? Isn't most sewer rates, aren't they somehow tied into water rates?
Yes, but I believe they have their own kind of calculation for them. And I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but I can
Okay,
find
so
out
they,
exactly
so
what that
that
is.
if they pay for sewer through the city, there's nothing else tacked onto that
They
at
pay
all?
for the exit, I guess, of the
Okay.
water usage.
Okay, so, okay, alrighty. And were those grandfathered in? Because it seems to me that now when you build in the city, you have to take city water. Am I not correct? Or is that not something you have to do?
Oregon revised statutes require when you're within a city or a certain feet away and there's development, even in the urban growth boundary, that you need to hook up to sewer. There's more flexibility when it comes to water usage, but sewer is a requirement because it's a public health and safety issue.
Okay, thank you. I thought it was water, but all
Yeah,
right,
to
thank you.
further go down that rabbit hole too, the city of Corvallis, if you don't have a water meter, they charge you the exact same as a residential 3/4 inch meter. So you could come up with something like that as well. I didn't put that in the data, not knowing which way you want to go. Impervious area, the pitfalls here are the approximation in the calculation, as some of these may be parking lots or other property types and not subject to the fee. So back to earlier question that Brian asked about how is that calculated. So every residential is a factor of 1. All your commercial and multifamily and public are based on a 3,700 square foot as a 1 factor, so anything above that. So if it were, I guess double that, it would be a score of 2. So 7,400 square feet as your lot would approximately be a factor of 2. And this is how these numbers come out in Exhibit 6. And that is why the commercial factor is relatively higher than the residential. Before I move on, are there any questions regarding Exhibit 6? Nope. All right, transportation pitfalls. There's about 209 of the 13,000 accounts. They're not subject to the transportation utility charge, and those are public parks, schools, county buildings, city buildings, and parking lots. And that was, I believe, previous direction of developing the transportation utility fee for the jail. And this is how the numbers come out for the transportation in Exhibit 7.
I do have a question on the transportation fee, because everybody pays a transportation fee. So when we did the jail, it was actually a jail utility. It wasn't a transportation fee, was it?
It
was a
wasn't, but it was built on the number of trips
Okay.
that each area or each, I guess, plot
So
of land
it
is
used the same
generating.
calculation, but it wasn't actually, it was a jail service fee? Because
Yeah, that's correct. At the time when council initiated the jail utility fee, we were discussing the nexus, or what is a good methodology that sort of has some kind of relation to maybe the amount of services that public safety provides, at the time, police and fire. And the link was transportation seemed to be that good link. Say an attorney firm or a residential structure, up to 10 a day versus a large commercial establishment like Walmart or Winco has a huge amount of trips per day, and there's usually an association with the amount of trips and the amount of calls.
I just want to make sure that it was actually a jail service fee. It was not a transportation fee at that point. Thank you.
And as you can see in Exhibit 7, you can see that as you move from the smaller elderly care facility calculation all the way to a commercial H of what that relatable charge per month would be. Are there any questions regarding the transportation style? Oh, all right. So a water meter, again, there's about 2,700 accounts out there that don't have water meters. 125 to 150 are outside of the city limits, and per previous council direction was not to include irrigation-only accounts. And if we were to go by water meter, this is an approximation of that monthly charge in Exhibit 8. And I'll flip to the next one, which kind of will compare closely, kind of apples to apples-ish, of that commercial, multifamily, public, and residential breakdown. Are there any questions regarding Exhibit 8? Nope. All right. So the local option levy, about every 29 cents is $1 million. The pros, it's been consistent voter approved at $1.79 since 2010. Currently receiving over $6 million in resources for public safety. The cons is it's temporary in practice and can have a maximum of 5 years. You're subject to future property tax compression first. Subject to voter approval, which may be contrary to community's desired level of service. And then that level of service stability, being that it's up every 5 years, is that kind of uneasy between the community and organization. So exhibits 9 through 11 is kind of a little bit more complicated, and so I'll kind of go through that one by one. Exhibit 9 is a list of approximately 25 example accounts and how they would be broken out. And what we did with Exhibit 10 is trying to show them all next to each other, the 4 different utility options, as well as an approximation of $1 million for the annual levy. And so currently we get about $6 million for the levy, so we were able to look up these properties, divide by 6 to get it kind of all relatable as far as what they currently pay in the levy and potentially what people would pay with each one of the 4 monthly utility fee rates. And then Exhibit 11 goes the other way. So since we get approximately $6 million, it would be what we would need to charge each one of the utility fees to make up $6 million in revenues for each one of those 25 accounts. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to get clarification, as I said I did. So, so basically across the top is what each one is in the factor. So what we're really looking at, I guess I'm trying to figure out exactly the best way to take a look at it. Say the specialty on 10, the specialty retail, the annual levy, they pay $51.36. Is that, am I reading that correct?
So they actually, so if you're looking at Exhibit 10, they actually pay on Exhibit 11 $308 annually. But if you were to back that into apples to apples for $1 million, you divide that by 6, and that's where that 5136 comes in.
Okay, so they're paying the 308 right now. So what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to clarify on that is that's what they're paying now for the annual levy. If they were to pay, if we were to get rid of the levy, that's what I'm trying to read. Where would I read how much they would pay? Is that right next to it? Like if we had an AUC, they would pay on an annual basis? Okay, 407. If it
And
was
that would be the Exhibit 11, correct, to make up that $6 million of revenue that we're currently receiving through the levy.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I knew how to read it. So and if we did the annual water meter, that's the size of the water meter, correct?
That is correct.
Then they would pay that amount per year. So,
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions regarding Exhibits 9, 10, and 11? Because it is a lot of information. All right. So kind of back to a couple presentations ago, that Nexus of Service. So based on policy considerations as the Nexus of Service provided and revenues received. So who's paying for the service and who's using the service? Trying to keep that in mind as far as when you're coming up with your solutions. And then currently, the potential dedicated funding target is about 10 million, which is approximately for fiscal year 23's budget. That's $6.2 million for a levy and another 3.8 in general fund support. Now over time, obviously this number is going to increase because costs are increasing for people and things. And as a timeline, here's just a reminder of if you're going to send these to elections, when the levy ends in June of 2024, and the potential timeline for an August 20 or a November 23 election and a May of 24 election. So the county proposal, the sales tax where the city would receive about $8 million. Pros, obviously, the consumer pays for the services, including outsiders. We're unknown as far as the proportion of outsiders versus inside spending, so we don't have that data. Other jurisdictions have models to leverage from. Obviously, the city of Ashland has a sales tax on their food and beverage. The cons, Oregonians typically adverse to sales tax, and you're subject to economic volatility. So of that $8 million, July 20th, 2022, council voted 4-3 in motion to endorse, promote, and partner with Josephine County and Cave Junction. And the level of endorsement was kind of undefined. So kind of put some options out there, letter, handouts, a web page, and then community meetings with Board of Commissioners. As an example for a web page, which it sounds like we've done one of these in the past, there's the city of Albany, and hopefully this comes up. That is a live actual feed, and it's not necessarily telling them to vote yes or no, it's just the informational background of how they got to their city services fee. And as you can click around here, you can kind of see some of the information that they provide. Frequently asked questions, and some graphics with how they came up with their decision.
Go ahead, Joel.
Good presentation. Had two questions. One actually is a statement. You know, people when they ask questions, they already know the answer to them. On every public meeting I've ever been involved with where the public asked me a question, they already knew the answer. So public involvement plan is really important. For example, having a joint from the council and the commissioners jointly go out and listen to what they call key contacts in the community, and it's not a telling, it's a listening thing because it shares power. And then public information meetings, and then actually gathering information from the public in an effective manner. And then you can have these other things as well, websites and that. So it's the question is, don't you think we need to get together with the county commissioners and have an effective public participation plan put together?
I would definitely agree with that statement. Your timeline is very short in which they are having to turn this around. So.
Right. Okay, so we need to proceed on that. Second thing is on the ballot. I think everyone up here endorsed putting it on the ballot for the citizens to look at. Wording on the ballot as to how the city of Grants Pass would offset the $1.79 levy if the sales tax was implemented, and that wording be put on the ballot. What is the timeline, and how do we need to proceed on that?
I believe their due date is middle of August to file those materials. And so again, the timeline is pretty short and it's your discretion as far as if you want that language in there or not.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, I understand that. So then the other question I have is if the levy raises 6.2 million and the sales tax raises 8 million, then it seems to me like the levy could be done away with entirely for property tax. And then on the average, there would be some years that would be below and some years that would be above. It would also help out the health of the general fund. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so there's probably additional conversations that kind of go along with that as far as where you want to mitigate your risk, right? So
Sure.
The $8 million is short of the 10 that is the approximation of that
Right,
levy
but
plus
it
general
exceeds
support.
the amount raised by the levy of 6.2.
Correct, it does.
So there is some slack there.
There is some slack, and you could take the levy to zero if you want. You could under levy at 29 cents for $1 million or 60 cents for approximately $2 million, depending on, again, costs are going up. And so that $10 million gap is going to
Increase.
over time because
Sure.
of the property tax maximum of 3%.
Sure. So the other question is then, when do we put that on our own agenda to make sure it gets on the ballot in terms of the offset of the property levy?
I think that depends on if you want that language to be in the ordinance, or if you want to just do an action outside of that ordinance after potentially it gets passed. So I guess it's all,
Yeah.
would you like that language within or not? And then if you want it in, great. If you don't, you can still make the decision later.
So we need to have that on our agenda as to what we want to do in a timely manner so that if we do want to put it on the ballot, we have time to do so.
Potentially, yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
I got a couple statements and then it lead to a question. But with regards to putting language on the ballot measure with regards to what happens to the safety levy, no disrespect to everyone on the council, but I don't really think that the public is going to be okay with and trust the statement, just pass the sales tax and we'll take care of the details of the levy later. As it is, it's an uphill battle. To ask for more money without specifically talking about how it's going to affect the levy is just flat out a recipe for it failing even worse, quite frankly, my opinion. But, so question I have though is, the statement I have, I guess, is, you know, Amazon sales, I guess, have gone up about 40% during COVID, more people staying home, less going to retailers and so forth. I have to ask the question, I know that the commissioners, Dan specifically, has been, you know, working on this for years and been throwing these basic figures around for years. I'd like to know what he bases the revenue generation from this sales tax on. How old are those figures, number one? Who did it? Has JC or anyone from the city actually verified that it seems reasonable? And the fact that, like I say, Amazon business and online businesses in general have gone way up, which tells me that retail business has gone down. So that's one statement that leads to the question of how can we actually even tell the public what we're going to do with the safety levy and how much we're going to need when we don't know for sure how much the sales tax is going to bring in. It could be more, it could be less. My guess is it may be substantially less than the figures that Dan has been using if those figures are old. So we need to verify figures. It would seem to me to be reasonable to verify those figures as best we can. I know years ago, they had figures they were throwing around that were 7 years old or 8 years old. We don't know. Do we know, JC, do we know how old these figures are?
I do
No
not
idea.
have the
Okay,
numbers
so
that they use.
before we even entertain this as a reasonable, do you know? Yeah?
What we were told by Commissioner Young is that there was a state economist that recently did the numbers. So my understanding is they're not older numbers like when Jay Meredith was here and they worked off of our numbers that we did when we were originally looking at a sales tax back in 2014. So my understanding is they're more recent numbers within the last year or two is where they came up with to formulate the projected revenue.
Okay. Well, it'd be nice to know the definition, the hard definition of recent and pre-COVID, post-COVID. Did anyone have an estimation for how that may have affected anything? The other question I would have, I guess, in general for council is if somehow a future governor were to, through whatever pandemic or whatever, were to shut down business again, if we were relying on a sales tax, what contingency would we have for paying for public safety if retail sales go to 50% or less of what we're projecting? Do we have you know, especially if we've done away with the levy or reduced the levy dramatically, what would we do? I mean, would police cars not have gasoline or what would we do?
So the short answer, I guess, to your question is it would be a potential laying off because police and fire are predominantly personnel-based. And so if, let's say, the estimation is quite a bit less than the $8 million, we would have to come up with a plan to reduce services and or people because the police and fire are personnel-driven as far as the service. So there would be that decrease. And part of my job, I think, would be to be as risk adverse as possible and wait for these revenues to actually come in before we actually make a decision as far as reducing the levy or not. Because again, I don't know what those numbers were based on, and or could very well be the COVID instance that you say. And if you look at the city of Ashland's financial report, and you can kind of see that they were about $3 million in sales tax revenue, and then through the COVID years, it definitely went down as far as the revenues generated. So in that instance, we would probably have to cut people.
There would have to be a bigger discussion policy-wise also. Once we recognize the numbers, council may want to take a look at your reserve policies. And that would be linked to how diversified you are also with your revenue streams. If you've got the majority of your revenue coming from one area, you may need to be more diversified. You may need to have a larger reserve for those ups and downs if it's based on an economic trend like sales versus property taxes, which is more consistent. So I think based on how diversified you are, that would need to be the discussion, and then also the amount of your reserves associated with that, so you can project out or at least potentially ride some of those peaks and valleys if you have a large enough reserve in the ups and downs of the economy. So these are all good discussion points.
So just, I guess, one last point then. I think that if there's any chance of the sales tax passing, the council has to have a very clear message to the public. And I think that there's a lot of discussion that has to be had about that clear messaging. I think that it's premature, although I want to consider different aspects of the utility fee, especially one that might go to the voters, et cetera. But to have so many balls in the air at the same time makes things incredibly confusing for the public. If the public's confused, they will for sure vote no. So I think that rather than going forward with too many more of these discussions about utility fees and so forth, I think there's other more pertinent questions if the council actually wants to get behind trying to pass the sales tax.
Yeah, to kind of buttress along the same vein of conversation, what happens if we get a windfall and it's $11 million, right? We would need to make policy considerations for that as well.
Other questions?
Actually,
Val?
I do have one question, and you brought it up, Rob, when you were talking about internet sales. It was my understanding, and I think this is what Dan said, is that there was a way for us to capture the internet sales, retail sales that happen within our county. Do we know that?
That is
correct?
what he said,
Okay.
correct.
You heard the same thing.
I heard
just
the
wanted to
same
make sure. Okay, thank you.
Rob?
So thanks, Valerie. Again, that's what Dan said the other day. That was in response to me bringing it up to him. They hadn't really looked at that for some amazing reason, but I'd also like some verification that that's actually true. You would think that it'd be easy to do, but I'd like some verification that actually is exactly what would happen. You know, again, to be able to message to the public more precisely and give them confidence that this thing may work. That's the key. If they have no confidence, they're never going to vote for it.
Val?
And I just want to clarify, because I do know that when we go out for the levy, the city cannot do it. It basically, the selling of it and all that is up to us. So it is up to us in terms of you can verify. Can you get the verification or whatever? Or how do we go about getting that verification between the city and the county, and you helping us look for the facts? Because I know that's one of the things that you can do, is you can help us build a fact sheet. So I guess my question to you is, can we give you that part of it?
Yeah, so I think Karen might actually have better information for me, but yes, we can't promote yes or no, but we can give the facts of the case.
Okay.
Rob?
It's been a long time, but as I remember it back, and Aaron may remember better than I, but in 14 or 15, the numbers on the potential for what the sales tax might generate, I think came out of some city in Washington, if I'm not mistaken. That was a before and after on the sales tax. So that actually is not really an apples to apples, comparison, because what we're, be proposing is a sales tax island. Okay, in Washington, it was not as I remember it, back in 15, it was not a sales tax island. So I'd like to know exactly what economist it was and what did they actually base those projections on. And again, as JC says, it might be, the revenues may be greater than what are projected. But it's hard to imagine an economist, predicting on a sales tax island situation how much it was bringing in, because we could lose, and we will lose, some sales to Medford. Maybe not a giant amount, but I'd like to know what that economist based it on.
So yeah, not knowing exactly what their numbers are, but in doing some research as far as what the city did previously with Jay, they used, I think, 5-year-old census data to come up with their estimation when we went through a sales tax discussion years ago. And so the data was pertinent to the city of Grants Pass, if I remember correctly.
I think Councilor Pell brings up some good points that does need some additional follow-up in order for council and the community to feel more confident and secure with what's being proposed. And I've written down some of those, and along with level of support, there are some items that maybe the mayor and council president can discuss with the Board of Commissioners at their upcoming meeting, at their next meeting.
Well, I think unfortunately we're not meeting with them until after this is, needs to be done for the purpose of the ballot title. And if you wanted to have a letter of support in the voters pamphlet, I believe that deadline's probably right around the 15th as well.
Yeah, so we'd have to reach out, and I can do that if council wants. We can gather some of these questions and try to get some additional information for you and put it in a memo or an email.
Go ahead, Rob.
Back in, and I'm, by the way, these questions I'm asking is, the purpose is that if somehow this sales tax passes, at that point, I'd like it to work. So that's why I'd like to be more accurate. But the question I have is, I don't know, back a year ago or a year and a half ago or whatever, council took a vote on whether or not council wanted to send a letter to the governor to reopen our restaurants in Grants Pass, and council majority voted yes. There were 3 or 4 who objected to being associated with that letter going to the governor. So the councilors that supported that letter basically did it individually. We have a similar situation here, where I voted against supporting the sales tax, and I voted for, I never got a chance to vote for putting it on the ballot alone. It was putting it on the ballot and supporting it. So in the past, we took councilors' names off it who did not support a letter that was going to the governor. I'm proposing the same thing in this situation, that councilors who want to do it can put their names in the voters pamphlet or whatever they want to do, and councilors who don't support it are not associated with it.
I don't know that that was a question for JC, was it? Okay.
It was a question of the council, sorry.
Okay. Do we have?
He already knows the answer.
Okay. Do we have any questions for JC? All right, I think it's probably just time to move into discussion of what you all want to do as a next step with this. So it sounds like we do have some discussion about how to write the letter, or how about if somebody who supports this makes a proposal of what you would like to do? Go ahead, Rick.
So I think one of the responses, I think it can be various responses, but I do like the one, coordinate with the Board of Commissioners to determine endorsement opportunities. I guess personally I would like to include an endorsement in the voters pamphlet, and I recognize only those people that are fully behind the sales tax would have their name in there, but I think that would be a real help to encourage people to consider that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Val?
Yeah, I agree that with, if somebody doesn't support it, their name doesn't need to be in there. I think that's probably understandable. I do believe in putting together a letter in there saying that because it will benefit the city, that therefore, I endorse it. On the county proposal of a potential language revision, I also agree with Rob that if there's not some sort of indication that something's going to go away, I think we have a very slim chance of passing the sales tax. So I think the first thing is to get the verification of the amount and understand where those numbers come from to kind of get an idea and kind of flush out. And before that, I would like to have something to put in there indicating that, yes, there will be a reduction. So I don't know exactly how to get to that point, but I do agree with Rob that if it's not there, I think you'll have a really hard time passing the sales tax.
So I think in order to put that in the letter, the council would need to agree that if this were to pass, you would be willing to eliminate or reduce
I guess, yeah, I would
levy?
like to say eliminate, but if that's the case, there's also that, what ifs, and that's a little frightening. So two people there are a very important conversation piece, so go ahead.
Aaron?
We would like to provide the caveat that it'd be maybe best to express your intent once the revenues are received to reduce the levy or eliminate the levy, but to put so in a ballot language may be putting some barriers on you that are going to be difficult for you to manage the ultimate revenue streams coming in. It may hinder your future options. So that's my caveat. I don't know if you have something to add to that.
Hear me? I was basically going to reiterate the same thing. Not pigeonholing yourself into potentially something that could come up where you need to levy back in 10 years because the revenues still aren't enough. Again, you could probably put in that language if you so desire as far as a reduction, but I would probably not recommend putting the word eliminate.
So more of an intention as opposed to, I think eliminate, well, that's why I said, I think eliminate is too strong. But I don't know if you can put something into having, going forward with citizen input or having, some sort of commission to look at it. I don't know what to do. I just would really like to somehow say that is our intent, is to look at it and restructure the taxing system to make it more diversified as opposed to just everything being on the property tax, and I'm not sure exactly how language-wise to say that.
Augustus, do you have a recommendation about whether we could make that decision today or whether we should wait for a business meeting?
In terms of whether you want to make that decision, that you're talking kind of about like language to go into the ordinance, talking about,
Or even just whether that is the council's intent, just to come to some sort of consensus on that.
I think you can come to a consensus on that today if you wanted to. And if you want to think about it in terms of kind of just committing to a discussion, there might be a way to put that in the ordinance where council will commit in a certain period, within a certain period of time, to reevaluate whether or not a reduction or an elimination might be prudent. That way you're not really, like JC said, pigeonholing yourself into making a commitment that you're going to do X, but instead making sure that you have a conversation, making sure that it's set that you're going to reevaluate it sometime down the line. That might be a discussion that I could have with county council and see if we can work something like that in, if that's what council would like to see.
To some degree, the levy comes up again in, 2024? It's a 3-year levy that passed last year, so voters will decide one way or the other if the council tried to put it back on the ballot again.
So then I guess that the question would be, if council decided that they wanted to recommit to a discussion about whether reduction or elimination of the levy is proper, does council want to put a timeline on that of 3 years? Does council want to do it in 2, 1? Do we want to set that timeline to be, do we want to tie that timeline to when, if or when the sales tax itself passes? I think that's a discussion for council to kind of decide the timeline to recommit to having that discussion about the levy.
JC?
So I'm going to add just one other point to the, I guess, conversation, just for your options. If the county were to, or this would to pass, and we were to see revenues coming in even before the levy ends, and potentially you can under levy the $1.79, and you're not stuck at $1.79, even though we're in the current levy period. So if it were to happen before the budget season of '24, which is coming up fast, and we were able to see the revenues coming in, potentially you could reduce the levy option before the levy period is over with.
DJ?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to give my 2 cents about intentions of this and ballot language or otherwise. The way I see this is it is a permanent funding source for public safety. That's the ultimate goal. The public safety levy is not permanent funding. So I want to do 2 things. I want to work on implementing permanent solutions, and I want to back away from temporary solutions. I see this as being part and parcel. Reducing the levy or eliminating the levy to this whole initiative for a sales tax. So I want to make it clear, it is absolutely my intention to bootstrap the bootstrap effect. One goes up, one goes down, sort of like a negative correlation to the sales tax. Ideally, eliminating it would be great. I do appreciate the concerns about what happens with fluctuating revenues if we're relying on a sales tax. Yeah, those are all concerns that we're going to have to consider. I think it's prudent to talk about contingency plans. Thinking really big picture, if we were to reduce the public safety levy, if we were to eliminate the public safety levy, we could then also reduce general fund allocation to public safety as this program is really successful. Good idea would be to allocate general fund then to a contingency to say, okay, if we have a reduced revenue source than is expected, we have a savings, if you will, or a contingency to help get back on track. As far as the ballot language goes, I do agree about not wanting to pigeonhole ourselves into saying this will eliminate it, it'll never come back, because we can't see that far in the future. But we certainly need to demonstrate, now if council agrees, that this is part and parcel to the whole product. We need our constituents to understand that this is not an increase in revenue. This is a different revenue source entirely, which means that the current revenue source would theoretically go away. We need to put that in the ballot. They need to understand it. That's my opinion. So, thank you.
Aaron?
Just listening to how the conversation is going, one potential recommendation would be that we can potentially craft some language that would state the city council would under levy or reduce the current levy in an amount equal to or greater than the revenue received from the sales tax. So there would be that correlation between revenue received would mean under levying and potentially eliminating the levy. You're not set to a certain percentage or a certain number, but it's a direct link to the revenue being received.
Joel?
So I would have I would direct staff to come up with wording to that extent and back for a council decision as to what we put on the ballot. And that would be a working hypothesis.
DJ?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity to speak one more time. There's one thing that I forgot to mention. If our intention was to not reduce or eliminate the tax levy, I wouldn't even be considering the sales tax right now. So if it becomes that is not council's intention, I am not interested at all in the sales tax. So I just wanted to say that as a way for everybody to understand what I believe this sales tax initiative actually means.
Okay, so I guess just to get you all to agree, is it council's intention that you would reduce or eliminate the sales tax or the levy to the extent that revenues are received from the sales tax? Everybody here says yes. DJ and Vanessa? Well, we know what DJ thinks. Vanessa, are you out there?
I am out here. Real quick, can anybody please remind the council, I know I'm getting us back off topic, can anyone remind the council of the timeline that all of this has to be completed by? The hard date?
So the final ballot language to go into the book and to the voters pamphlet needs to be filed by August 19th.
By the county. So we
By the
need to provide anything to them before that, so that they have time
Yes.
to include our language in theirs if needed.
Correct.
Okay, I'll keep it short and say altogether I don't support any endorsement of the sales tax on the ballot, so I'll abstain from discussion around what it should entail.
Okay. Okay, well, I think we have general understanding from the council that if it were to pass, we would be looking at reducing the levy in some sort of corresponding fashion. I think it sounds like there were 4 councilors who supported endorsing it. So because you don't actually have a majority of the 8, I'm going to recommend that you 4 write the letter of support and put your names on it rather than having the endorsement come from the whole council. Yeah, Joel.
And so with the addition of the reduction that tied in property tax, I would support and endorse the sales tax as well. Because I think it makes it a viable package. So I would like to be included with those other 4.
Oh, I see. Okay, because you didn't vote that way last time. Okay. I think we probably should have a web page of informational materials. Does anybody disagree with that? DJ, your hand's up.
I just wanted to respond to the comment that since we don't have unanimity of council, we don't have council's endorsement. And just clarify, if that's what's said and what's proposed, that we can only now get a letter from only 4 councilors because that was the vote. And if that is what is meant, I need to say that I categorically disagree with that. We are a council and we decide by majority what we do, including this. We have council majority. That letter is council's support for the sales tax, as is every other marginal vote. Every other majority otherwise is council's directive, and so is this. So this letter needs to come from the City Council of Grants Pass endorsing the sales tax. Now, I'm not saying that there are people that disagree. I'm saying then it will be the individual councilor's job, as Rob Pell mentioned, he's going to exit the room and maybe not support the sales tax as a constituent, and that's fine. But I need to say it again, the majority agreed on endorsement, therefore that letter is coming from the Grants Pass City Council.
Well, DJ, Joel was originally a no vote last week, but he just said that he would endorse it. So I think that gives it 5, and that changes things considerably because normally 4 would not be a majority of the council.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Okay, so we'll need to have you all, somebody needs to write the letter and we can have a formal vote on it. Rob?
Well, I can possibly agree with DJ's point from this point forward. I do need once again to remind him and others that last year when the council took a vote of whether or not to send a letter to the governor to request reopening of the restaurants in Grants Pass, council majority voted yes. The mayor and Brian and Vanessa did not want to be part of it, refused to be part of it. We sent individual letters as a result. DJ also voted against that letter, if I remember correctly, going to the governor. I don't remember what your position was on that, whether or not you wanted to opt out and whether you ended up sending a letter. I don't believe you did. So in the past, my point was, in the past, we did handle this, a very similar situation, very differently. So if we want to agree that we were inconsistent, DJ, on this, the way we've done the last 2 issues that are like this, I could see possibly having a policy in the future that the majority would then send out the letter. And I wouldn't necessarily be against that this time, but I would like to, again, remind you that that is not how it was handled in the past by you and the others who voted against sending a letter to the governor. Thank you.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Joel?
So I'm a little bit confused. We voted to put it on the ballot, and we need to make sure we got appropriate dialogue that appears on the ballot, and we need to have staff come back with what they feel the gist of the conversation was today, so that the council can approve it. And so I was a little bit confused and got a little bit off track by the conversation, but I think that's the essence of where we're at. Okay.
Yeah, I would say because we have a fairly swift timeline here, do you feel comfortable having a letter written by August 3rd?
Well,
Val?
I'm just asking for clarification, because I know right now what we're talking about, the ballot measure, and the ballot measure has to be put on by a certain time. Does the letter endorsing it have to be by the same time? I thought that came later.
It's usually
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
It's usually right, or very close to the filing deadline.
But it goes on what you're doing is putting it on the voters.
In the voters pamphlet,
And that's
yes.
a different date than putting it on the ballot or not? That's my question.
No, it's the same date.
It is the
so,
same date.
yes.
Okay, that's what I wasn't sure of, whether that was the same date as what needed to go into the voters pamphlet. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so staff, do you think you can prepare whatever it is we would need to provide to the commissioners by the 3rd?
I'll endeavor to. I'll have a conversation with county council and let them know what we discussed here today.
Okay, just seems like we really need either that or the 8th, or we're looking at a special meeting for this. Joel?
So just to be clear, there's 2 items, and one is the ballot language, and the second is a letter from the council that would appear in the pamphlet, the voters pamphlet. So there's actually not just one item, there's 2 items.
And to be more specific, the ballot language that you're asking for, you're referring to, is to potentially reduce or to under levy based on an amount equal to or greater than the revenues received by the sales tax. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's correct. That's correct from my perspective. I didn't hear any.
Yeah, maybe we don't need that. I think we can at this point relay that to the commissioners. It's really up to the county to provide the full ballot language. Is there anything further that we need to provide to them?
I was just wanting to clarify, I was along the same lines of, on the same road as Augustus here. I was thinking there's two actions coming through. Having a letter that council will be able to support, that'll go into the voters pamphlet.
Yes.
But then also having us working with county's legal counsel to try to place in the ballot language something that, if passed, the city of Grants Pass would eliminate or reduce an amount greater to or less than. Of course, that's going to be hard to potentially do because there's a number of words that is associated with those that they can only use, and that's a lot. That's a good sentence that they may not have the space for. But those were the two issues. Unless it was not council's intent to actually have that in the ballot language, but we just promote it, that's a different thing. So that would be something that we'll just express to the county on where we're going, but it won't be a part of the ballot language. So I need clarification, Mayor, on whether or not it's council's intent to have that language as part of the ballot title, explanatory statement, or not.
I thought it was our intent to have it as part of the ballot statement. I mean, there's no reason not to if that is everybody's shared intent is to reduce the levy correspondingly. And as Rob pointed out, it's not going to pass unless we say that. So I think because it's really up to the county to write the ballot, we need to communicate to them
That's what we'd like to see.
our willingness to include that line.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
they need to write the ballot, and then maybe the council needs to see the ballot language and officially
Approve it.
okay our okayness with it.
So the explanatory statement and all of that stuff, I think, is actually due next week. But the language that's going to go in the actual ordinance, council is going to see beforehand. The explanatory statement is, like Aaron said, there's constraints on the number of words we can use. I have thoughts about how we can get that taken care of. So it's the explanatory statements and the ballot title and all of that that's going to be due on the 3rd. The filing is due on the 19th for the final language. So for the final language and everything that's going in the voter registration, or the voter's pamphlet. So you'll see the ballot language beforehand. Whether we give you that, we'll give you that explanatory statement and the ballot title as soon as possible. It'll be a quick turnaround, but I can make it happen.
Okay, it's due on the 3rd?
Yes, I believe the 3rd's the last night that it has to be approved on the 3rd.
Okay, so yeah, we'll just get that on if you need us to approve something by the 3rd, yeah, get it on the 3rd agenda and we'll work on that.
Okay.
And then I guess as far as coordinating with the Board of Commissioners, if there are other endorsement opportunities, we'll leave that to the councilors who would like to do that.
Well, I guess I have clarification, because the letter, I think, probably needs to be written by us, the council. And so I will volunteer to work on that letter
Okay.
while they're working on the other, and then I'll bounce that off the people who do want to sign it.
I think that'd be great. I mean, I think that, I don't know, personally, if, not being a counselor, if 5 council members approve something, I would say that's a majority and that it could be considered signed by the Grants Pass City Council. I don't agree with that with 4 because, normally with 4, I would break a tie and I'm not going to break that one for you. But it sounds like you may have 5. But yes, I think if you could get it, if you want that on the August 3rd meeting, we could do it then. If you wanted to do it on the August 8th meeting, we could do it then.
Okay.
Okay. Any discussion you wanted to have about utility fee or just take that in as background for the moment? All right, just anything else on public safety funding in general?
Yeah, I think it's just good general information as we go out and talk with the public and promote and talking about all of the different avenues that we're looking at and all of the different options that we are considering in trying to make a permanent solution to law enforcement funding.
Okay. agenda review today. So we had agreed to try to trim back some of our workshops. So we do not have a workshop scheduled for next Monday. And then we have a business meeting next Wednesday with a public hearing on the final review of the draft annual action plan. And remind me what group or what was that for? The annual action plan.
The review of the draft annual action plan, that's for the Community Development Block Grant Fund in your consolidated plan.
Okay, thank you. CDBG and consolidated plan. Then we have an ordinance to consider a text amendment for the adult use buffer zones. I'm also not sure why that one's been coming up again. Do you know?
I have not reviewed the packet, but I believe that it's due to a request of a change in the adult use buffer plan that's gone through the UAPC.
Yes, it's basically an appeal of the UAPC decision.
With regards to the 1,000-foot buffer and medical and marijuana establishments.
Yes, having to do with the Rogue Redwood Hotel.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a council action item, a second reading on the small wireless facilities ordinance from last week. A resolution to consider putting a council stipend on the ballot title, and you would all need to be prepared to decide an actual dollar amount if you want that to go forward. The explanatory statement for that as well. And then a resolution for a system development charge grant extension for Erickson, a SDC, again, grant extension for the Bohemian, a resolution to provide $1,500 for COPA, and I forget what the art project was. What was that? Somebody remember?
I believe that's for one of the
Art in motion?
I believe it's for one of the
Sorry,
art along the
JC.
road.
What was it, Vanessa?
Art in motion.
Art in motion, okay. To help fund, art in motion on the buses.
I think it was actually for the
It was for the
newspaper.
Courier.
It was for the Courier.
It was to Artist of the Month in the Courier.
Thank you.
Okay. And a resolution to award the C Street Endemic Reconstruction Project, and a resolution to amend the HAC membership. I think that one was to include an actively working builder. Okay. Any questions about next week's meeting?
Mayor,
Yeah.
was the Housing Advisory Committee, was that for a member of county? I believe they've had issues with attendance.
Oh, if the
I
Housing
believe
Advisory,
the for-profit.
if the Housing Advisory Committee membership had to do with a county position due to
Yeah,
different.
that's correct.
They did
Maybe the
make it,
liaison can clarify.
I think they wanted to make it more of an open at-large position than a specific county seat position.
Okay, so this isn't actually to add that professional builder, it's to change the nature of the county position to an at-large?
I think we already, Karen, we already made that change to do the.
Okay, we already did the professional
The full
builder.
profit. That was done a month or two ago.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Vanessa. All right, anything further on Wednesdays? It's actually next Wednesday. Okay, and then the August 8th workshop right now has Allenwood property update and a discussion on ARPA affordable housing, and that will also be potentially our last chance at making any changes regarding the sales tax if we have unresolved business at that time. All right. Anything further anybody wants to add coming down the pipe? Rob?
I'm not sure if we have to discuss this further at a workshop or if we could do it today or whatever, but I think when we had our appeal of the trespass in the park deal, I think the counselors I spoke with anyway all felt that we wanted to arrange it, either hire a hearings officer or arrange it so that the council would not be acting as the the appeals body, so to speak. So again, I don't know what we have to do to change that or make that discussion happen, but I don't know any counselor that wanted to continue with the with what we did.
Staff is already working on that and kind of doing the background work to get something in place for that, and then we'll probably need to have a vote at some point to just approve hiring a hearings officer, but that's being done in the background. Anything else? Brian?
Mayor, I do have one.
Okay, go ahead, Vanessa.
Sorry, it's so hard not to walk all over people remotely. I wanted to revive the discussion around allocating for a certain percentage of tourism lodging tax dollars for projects that the Committee of Public Art does. I know we had that discussion back in April, and I'd like to revive that and bring it back.
Yeah, I know we have in the back just a process for TLT dollars in general. So yeah, that's probably something we should move up sooner than later.
I want to say also, I think that at one point in time we talked about having the tourism talk about it, the tourism committee, because that was also involved them. So I don't know that that might be a good place to place it.
Yeah, we have been waiting a little to see what their advice is just on their role of that committee in general, and I'm not sure where they're at. We'll check in on that. Okay, back to you, Brian.
Yeah, I had a new topic. I wanted to see if there's interest amongst counselors to begin having a discussion around pursuing a strategy for getting easements to construct or establish a river path from Riverside Park down to either Tussing or to the sports park on one of the sides of the river. And this would be a long-term plan, obviously, but wanted to see if council would be open to having an initial conversation about that.
Is there council interest in that? I'm seeing some hands. Rick has a question.
If we go back in history, in the city, those easements were very controversial, especially for private properties that had frontage on the river. And it was many, I want to say actions and proposals were made and incurred quite a bit of opposition. And a lot of it that time was concern for safety for the residences, because it was found that people with other intentions would use those paths for burglary and things like that. If there's some way to show where those easements are located, like in Eugene, it's in an industrial area where you don't have that impact, I think there would be some validity to pursue that. And while I really applaud your idea, and I think it would really be neat to have that connection, especially for bicycles and just people going through there, I'm not sure if the public's ready for it, and I'm not sure if we have a way of designing a path that can protect the public. And I think that, and maybe that would be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Val.
I'm going to agree with that, because even on this, in the last couple of years, when it was brought up by the parks, there was a lot of opposition and a lot of kickback. And personally, this goes back to our strategic plan. That's not on our plan. That's not in the plan. I really think the energy, and one of the reasons that we put ourselves in situations to have such long meetings and things, as we put ourselves out on these controversial things, that I would rather get a feedback and follow up on what's going on with the Whitewater Park or that sort of thing, because that was one thing that was stated as was a goal that we had. So I would rather see us stick with the parameters of what we have set out to do, and if somebody wants to champion that for down the road at a strategic planning, to me that would be a better place to put it.
Brian?
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I'm championing it now, and I think that any time is a fine time to have an initial discussion about a topic. I see that our future agenda is super light. And so, if we have an initial meeting and there's enough traction on it, maybe that would be a strategic planning item for next year. But right now we don't know. So I was just looking to have that initial conversation.
I'm not sure that I'd characterize our future agenda as super light. It's just a matter of holding space that we haven't allocated yet, but we have plenty of stuff to talk about. Rob?
Yeah, well, I agree with Brian's intent or his goal, and having a river path would be fantastic. I think I also agree with Valerie's point that it's not on the strategic plan for this year. I'd like to discuss it during strategic planning for next year, because I think it's a really great idea. But, if this were the month of December and we'd already checked everything off our strategic plan for the whole year, I'd say, okay, let's discuss it. But that ain't happening, so I would agree that we should probably put it off to strategic planning of next year.
All right, well, you were one of the hands that I saw raised, so I guess I'll ask again, is there council interest in having an upcoming workshop on this? Raise your hand. All right, we just saved ourselves an hour. All right, anything further? All right, we need a motion to adjourn into executive session.
I'll make a motion to adjourn into executive session.
Second? Rick with the second, thank you. All in favor of adjourning into executive session?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of discussing those subjects previously notified for this executive session. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660 and more specifically under the subsections of that statute which have been publicly noticed for this meeting, which is property. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. All representatives of the news media are specifically requested not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session, and at the end of the executive session, we will return to the open session and welcome the audience back into the room. And it looks like we just need to wait a minute for the TV to go off.